Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction, who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah, what movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about 2024's Shirley. This is the Shirley about Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, not the one about the writer Shirley Jackson, which stars my boyfriend Michael Stolberg and my arch nemesis Robert Wolf. Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning. This movie contains depictions of racism, misogyny, political corruption, and some hairdos that may look a bit matronly to modern eyes. Sarah, can you think of anything else?
No, that about covers it. And Rena, can you give us a spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in this episode include articles from Slate, Smithsonian Magazine, the book Unbought and Unbossed by Shirley Chisholm, and the documentary about Shirley Chisholm, Unbought and Unbossed. I would also like to give a shout out to my recommended read for the week, which is Shirley Chisholm is a Verb, a children's book written by Veronica Chambers. Guess which one of us read the children's book?
It wasn't me.
This is a book I have given more than once as a gift for people with children. It's a really great book. And it's pictures, so it's like 32 pages, so anybody can read it.
Does it talk about the dissolution of her first marriage?
Does not.
Huh.
Really stays in the light.
Does it address many of the racial complications or the political backstabbing that we saw in this movie?
In a way, but not probably in a way that you would find particularly satisfying. It is for children. So, children will find out very soon about how bros are going to be bros no matter what color they are.
So, Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Shirley and about Shirley Chisholm, the first Black Congresswoman who represented Brooklyn?
So this is from our friends at Wikipedia about the movie Shirley. It's a 2024 film written and directed by John Ridley. It depicts the 1972 presidential run of Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to be elected to the United States Congress. Film stars Regina King in the title role alongside Lance Reddick, Lucas Hedges, Brian Stokes Mitchell, Christina Jackson, Michael Cherry, Andre Holland, welcome back to the show, Andre, and Terrence Howard. Shirley had a very limited theatrical release in the U.S. before it went over to Netflix in March of 2024, so there's no box office numbers reported. It did have a warm reception, but no awards. And then a little teeny tiny bit about our friend Shirley Anita Chisholm, born November 30th, 1924, passed January 1st, 2005. She was an American politician who became, in 1968, the first Black woman to be elected to Congress. Chisholm represented New York's 12th Congressional District, a district centered in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, for 7 terms from 1969 to 1983. In 1972, she became the first Black candidate for a major party nomination for President of the United States and the first woman to run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. Throughout her career, she was known for taking a resolute stand against economic, social, and political injustices, as well as being a strong supporter of Black civil rights and women's rights. She was born in Brooklyn, New York. She spent ages 5 through 9 in Barbados, and she always considered herself a Barbadian American. I wanted to just up top address a few very cool things about the people behind this film, which I told you I was very excited to share with you. So our queen and our star, Regina King, welcome back to the show, Regina King. And John Ridley, the director, writer, and co-producer, are both Renaissance people. John Ridley started his career as a stand-up comic in the 80s. He was pretty successful at that. He appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and on Late Night with David Letterman. He wrote for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Martin, and he casually wrote the novels on which Oliver Stone based the film U-Turn and the book that David O. Russell based the movie Three Kings on. So he has 7 novels, all of which have ISBN numbers attached to them. He won an Oscar for writing 12 Years a Slave. He's also a playwright. He directed and wrote this film. He's got a bunch of things that haven't happened or have been canceled that I am very interested in, including a TV series for Disney that is set in the world of Tron. Also, in 2021, he became the writer of Black Panther, the comics for Marvel. He and Regina King have collaborated in the past, primarily on the show American Crime, which is an anthology series where each season is its own thing. And she has been on every season of that. We could probably do a whole podcast on the work and career of John Ridley. And I want to be clear that we shouldn't. You and I are uniquely unqualified to do so because he is a thoughtful observer of Black America, and I have absolutely no right to comment on his thoughtful observations about Black America, except to say that his thoughts are provocative and complicated, and he's a very, very, very good writer. Regina King, as you know, she used her eviscerating glare in Ray to turn Jamie Foxx into ash. She also directed the movie One Night in Miami, which is a stay tuned for us. She's one of our finest actresses right now. She's also low-key directed a ton of other television shows and episodes, including several episodes of the series A Man in Full that's on Netflix now. I personally have watched Regina King work since I was a little girl, when she was on the TV series 227, but also she's got an Oscar. She's got 4 Emmys. She's got tons of awards for her work. And most of those awards for film came about for the film If Beale Street Could Talk. And I can still sing the full theme song to 227. I've linked to it in our show notes. All of this to say, just speaking of unique and qualifications, these are 2 artists who are uniquely qualified to dive into the complexity of Shirley Chisholm's remarkable life and her politics and her uncompromising strength and leadership and the roles of both Blackness and femaleness in that. And as I mentioned, Andre Holland, we just saw him in 42. And also welcome to the show, George Wallace, and the mention of Richard Nixon, because we'll see both of you later. So that's all my backstory about the people involved with the making of this. I also want to mention too that Shirley's sister in this film is played by Regina King's real life sister, Raina, and the internet told me this. Both of their names mean royalty.
Yeah, right. I think Regina is Latin and Reina is Spanish.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Let's talk about this movie. I loved this movie. It's not perfect, but I really loved it. It opens with these wonderful vintage visual aids that show us the number of seats in Congress and the number of seats that are held by Black people, and then the number of seats that are held by women, and how Shirley is the first of her kind. And you see right away how different she was in her personhood with all of these white crackers she's checking into Congress with, who all look the same. And I think that was very much by design. Like, I couldn't tell any of them apart. And it was like, and I think that's the point. They were all bald. They were all at least vaguely racist. And she calls herself Mrs. Shirley Chisholm, which I love.
I felt sad a lot while I was watching this because I was constantly thinking about how far we still have to go, how little has changed, and how close we came and how much we've backslid.
Yeah. This was in some ways a really heartbreaking watch. And I did at one point text you like in the middle of watching it where I told you I was sobbing. Like there's one guy who keeps coming up to her every day that they're there and saying like he can't believe that he is making the same amount of money as a Black woman. And I was just like, oh my God, kill me. Oh, you garbage person.
I was also surprised that she's only in her 40s here, and I guess it has to do with how the styles of the time looked on her, but also it's always been on Congress people to dress conservatively. Shirley and her husband are so cute in the opening bit where we meet her. She is running up to the steps of the Capitol, taking one last slurp on a McDonald's cup for the freshman class of the 91st Congress photo. I watched the documentary and I feel like Regina King plays her with more of an obvious accent than I heard in the clips of Shirley Chisholm. And I know that I guess some people who have like an accent that they'll play it down when they're in public. So I don't know if that was an intentional decision, but in the footage that I watched of Shirley Chisholm, the accent was not as strong as what is done here.
Her accent was heavy in this movie, and people complained about it in the user reviews on IMDb. I know that's going to shock you.
Mm-hmm.
Because, no one ever complains about anything on the internet.
So after this scene where she's being sworn in, it shows a block party where you see all of the diverse groups in her constituency are all hanging out, and she speaks Spanish. And it seems like everyone is really happy with Shirley except for her mom and her sister.
We get to that later, and it's really interesting, the perspective that they have on it. But I'm going to table that for the moment. It's Christmas time, 1971, and she's at home, and she gets a knock on the door, and it's, "Hi, Lance Reddick."
So welcome to the show, and I think this might be the only time we have you. And R.I.P. Lance Reddick. He was an actor who died at about 60, which is quite young for this day and age. He was fantastic. He is best known for his work on The Wire. There's some mention of the ERA and how they're going to pass it, and people seem so hopeful about all the things that didn't come to pass or came close and didn't happen. I felt sad a number of times in this. To your point about not being able to tell these guys apart, if you've seen one racist, you've seen them all.
Pretty much, yeah.
So she finds out that her first committee assignment is on the agriculture committee. So relevant to someone representing an urban district. And she'd hoped to be on Veterans Affairs or possibly education. Ron Dellums, who we meet here, tells her you can't complain about it when you're a freshman. It talks later in here about how that she complained about it, and that isn't exactly what happened. It's that she was also upset about the subcommittees, and she did make the best of things on the agriculture committee in terms of establishing food programs that would help her constituency. But then the point where she made a fuss was when she found out that her next committee assignment was going to be forestry.
That doesn't even make sense. I guess like a particularly clever person, someone like Shirley, could turn that into a negotiating tool and work with someone who is on something that actually concerns her constituents. So Lance Reddick shows up, and I guess, oh, hi, Terrence Howard. They managed to make him so utterly delightful in this movie, which I was very impressed with, because Terrence Howard makes me uncomfortable. He's got some real weird views.
I don't want to know any of his weird views.
Don't worry about it. Everybody's got the internet. He's a good actor, and I think he's deployed incredibly well here because he comes off as warm and sweet and smart in this movie. So we find out that a bunch of women in Florida have raised $10,000, and Shirley told those women that if they raised the money, she'd run for president. And why can't you win as a Black woman? And I'm like, oh, honey, these are hard questions.
One of the things that this film does really well in terms of being real is like it shows you that Shirley has a very supportive marriage, but it's starting to fracture. And about 5 years after this, she divorced Conrad and married the character played by Terrence Howard. But they're honest about showing the fractures. And one of the things I've noticed is there are various scenes where you'll see her holding hands with someone or putting a hand on someone's hand, and there'll be a shot of it. And I never knew there was so many kinds of hand holding.
There's so much hand holding in this movie.
I almost felt like the hand holding was a little bit of a trope Navajo moment.
Yes, I can see that.
So in The Doors, there's this old Navajo man who is embedded in Jim Morrison's head, who shows up at various points of emotional significance throughout the film. Yeah, maybe this is the kind of thing that trope Navajo was meant to try to do to underline a moment emotionally. This is so late to be starting a candidacy by modern standards. I remember going into the 2020 cycle, Elizabeth Warren announced right after Christmas of 2018. It's just crazy to me that someone could start so late back then.
It's kind of refreshing though. Like we belabor the presidential election cycle to an agonizing degree in this country. And it's kind of like refreshing to be like, oh, they're only going to run for like a year? That's amazing.
I know. They actually did their jobs that they were elected to. Oh my gosh, someone running for president would actually do their homework as like senator or governor for a few years before they started the whole thing. OMG.
These people all go hang out in Iowa. They go eat weird fried food on sticks at the Iowa State Fair. They stand on hay bales and roll up the shirt sleeves. And like you see that in the media for approximately 100 years between elections. And the 72 election was a particularly fraught one because, yeah, specter of Nixon, like he's engaging in his spying, and McGovern gets his ass handed to him in the 72 election in the most agonizing fashion is kind of the headline of it. For like secretly getting involved in Cambodia, and we're about to kind of like hard launch the Khmer Rouge, and Vietnam is still going on. But like also in 72, I'm pretty sure Nixon founded the EPA. Can you even imagine?
By modern they'd call Nixon a rhino now. Like by modern standards, he's practically she's making up her mind the Christmas before the election, not the Christmas before, on $300,000. Wow, money and politics.
I mean, the dollar went a lot further, but that's still like maybe $1 million in modern money. Like that's nothing.
I keep questioning through this. Did she really think she could win, or did she think that she was going to run as if she could?
I mean, that's a really good question because she is so idealistic and has such a big vision that there's a part of me that thinks like that at least for a while she was like, this is crazy enough to possibly work. But then also I think like she understood the symbolism and the political capital of doing it. Because she wasn't naive.
She says that her point is to bring politics back to the people.
Yeah, which is like an insanely idealistic thing to say. And honestly, I'd love to see everyone be like that rather than what we have right now, where it's so cynical and it's so like run by money and by corporations and everything. Like there is something like really wonderful about a middle-aged woman who has not lost her sense of hope.
Yeah, I haven't met one of those in a really long time.
Right? And also I want to just add, whoever did this decoration for this film, Shirley's home to me leapt off the screen with its warmth and its very specific era of decor. Like I felt the coziness of that home.
And I felt the avocado metal shelves next to the pale green refrigerator.
I know what this house smells like, and not in a bad way. It was so beautifully done because it felt so authentic, and it exploded off the screen for me. So bravo to that set dresser.
So Shirley is back in her DC office where a young former intern of hers named Robert Gottlieb walks in, and he is played by an actor who I think of as that kid who was in everything in 2017.
Also known as Lucas Hedges, co-star of Manchester by the Sea. He's really delightful, and he looks like a child, which is the point.
Oh, I almost didn't recognize him because he's all grown up to me, since I remember him from Manchester by the Sea, from Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, from Lady Bird. He played a teen a lot in like 2017 in very well regarded films. And it's heartwarming to see a young white man care about being an ally.
And he's like the real deal ally too. He is definitely like a hashtag not all white men.
Yeah.
And she strong arms him because Shirley can convince anyone to do anything into being her national student coordinator.
He really believes that she would be the most amazing president that this country has ever seen. And that is what he says. He'd be the most amazing president this country has ever seen. And he isn't thinking about logistics. He's just super idealistic. And they've been talking about, oh, this is the first election where 18-year-olds will be eligible to vote.
And Brian Stokes Mitchell shows up, and hi, Brian Stokes Mitchell. And he is showing up to run the campaign. He's got like Rahm Emanuel energy of like, we have to box you in here and package you correctly.
But he's doing this because he's following what has worked on other campaigns. And he's saying, I will apply my expertise to make you more bland. But he is someone who is immersed in a realpolitik mindset. And I don't blame him. He just has a different philosophy of what works in order to get elected. And I don't think there's anything morally wrong with that. I have an appreciation with being willing to give up pieces of yourself to get shit done, even if it's compromised.
This goes back to why John Ridley is such a good writer and why this screenplay is so good. No one's a villain in this. Everyone is coming to the table with a very real set of reasons why they're doing something and why they believe something and why they're frustrated about. It's a very like grown-up movie in the way that, like, not unlike Shirley, it's all about like the nuance of everything. Of like being a woman in politics, about being the first Black woman to do this.
I had the note about Brian Stokes Mitchell that he doesn't get her, but he's someone who could effectively manage a campaign that actually had a shot, meaning like a more mainstream candidate. But we love Shirley for not being that. We love Shirley in this for not being that.
The thing is, though, too, is like her ideas aren't crazy. It's just... It's crazy because it's coming from a middle-aged Black woman. Her views and what she wants are really like well within the mainstream of what we should want. So it's January 25th, and she gives a brilliant, polished, simple speech, and she is in it to win it.
Yeah, and I noted that they copied that black and white dress that she's wearing. In this, it is a perfect copy of a dress that I saw photos of Shirley Chisholm wearing. And also, they show that she wears the same thing multiple times throughout the movie on a number of dresses, and everything looks a suitable amount of worn but cared for.
Immediately, she is starting to see the blowback of all of this campaigning too, because we have pushback within the Democratic Party about how it's not her turn. We hear her imitating this man, Fauntleroy, saying like, be a good little girl and wait your turn.
She says this when she is meeting with Ron Dellums, another Black congressman, and he says that he'll put all of his capital behind her.
And, you know, and we're hearing from her fellow women in footage, like in historical footage, like Bella Abzug and Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, about how, like, it's cute that she's running, but we can't vote for her. Which is something I recall hearing a lot of in 2008. Yeah, Shirley says, we're just beginning to admit that we have a problem with gender politics. And I'm like, we will continue to not admit that we have a problem with gender politics till now and forever and ever.
Yeah, I look at the footage of these women in the second wave of feminism, and I think of what they pushed for, and it's heartbreaking how little influence of that is affecting us now. Right. And then she, on a character note, she tells Ron, like, can we go get McDonald's? I had the note, how does she stay so tiny eating all that McDonald's?
She loves McDonald's. And I love that for her. I think it was also when you look at the history of the serving size and the food preparation and everything too, I think there was a time period where McDonald's wasn't as consequentially terrible for you to consume as it has become. That said, she does love McDonald's and it's great. I'm curious, how are we feeling at the end of our first Black History Month on the show?
Sad, because these films, they've reminded me of how much hasn't shifted in attitudes, how much has gone backwards in our lives. And I found myself feeling massive admiration for people, but also sad. I'm glad that we did it, and I plan on doing it again next year, and trying to have our subject matter match the population demographically remains important to us, even if our current government thinks that that's racist.
Yeah, I'm feeling very similarly. This was a really great month of movie watching, and it was very powerful to see these individual stories and feel the hopefulness of those in this time period. I'm coming away from it feeling really bummed about how far we've let things go backwards.
The young Barbara Lee is about to enter the movie, and she is someone who is pessimistic about politics as they are. We see her talking to Shirley in the line where she greets her, and then she takes her aside, and Shirley's first thing is to reiterate to her that you have to be willing to work within the system to get things done. And Barbara gives her some purist line about voting is bourgeois politics, and I have the note, boy, am I glad she ditched the purity. It's nice having her in Congress.
I love that Shirley is constantly like, you got to work within the system that we have. Like, it's all well and good to hate it, but this is what we have, so we have to work with it. She tells her, like, you have to register to vote. That's the first thing you need to do.
Barbara says something about we're supposed to vote for one man because he's better than the man that's corrupt. I wrote, like, I would happily accept better than the man that's corrupt with tears of joy at this point.
Oh, for sure. Nixon? Amazing. Let's bring him back.
I would take him in a heartbeat over what's there now.
I would also like to just say that the actress who plays Barbara Lee, it's an actress named Christina Jackson, and she is so lovely in this movie. Like, she's just so beautiful. I couldn't stand it. It's like, you're so pretty. And she gives a really wonderful, nuanced performance as well. So Shirley comes home from California.
So we see what flying was like back then, but she is making my very least favorite flight ever, flying back from California late at night.
Yeah. Not a fan.
Nothing wrecks me worse than coming home in the early AM from the West Coast. And Conrad doesn't have food ready for her.
Yeah, so she makes herself a TV dinner. Then we have a conversation about delegates where they're looking at the map and trying to decide which states she can win. And they're saying, like, you have to get California. And she's like, California is a big, shiny prize that if we waste all of our time trying to get it, we're going to miss all of these other places. I want to focus on Florida. And then she starts circling other random states.
I do feel their frustration at her is warranted where she's dismissing their suggestions out of hand about various states. They say voters haven't heard of her yet, but also they're talking about all of these states where the primary doesn't matter anymore as if they matter. And it must be so nice to not have your vote not count because your state has a late primary because you're after Super Tuesday, but to actually have a wide open field and real choices and a chance of your primary vote mattering.
And then we run into Governor George Wallace.
Yes, welcome to the show, George Wallace. Expect you'll show up in a few other movies.
The circumspection that takes place in George Wallace is nothing short of miraculous.
So he's running as a Democrat because it used to be in this country that the parties had a broader ideological idea that played out differently in different regions of the country. Back then, the term liberal Republican wasn't an oxymoron yet, and there were also these Dixiecrats who were Southern Democrats who were populist for white people.
And this is like 15 minutes in geological time after Lyndon B. Johnson offended all of the Southern Democrats by passing civil rights laws. They're still out in the wilderness because Ronald Reagan hasn't adopted all of them and been like, my big tent can hold your racism. So for now, they're part of the Democratic Party, but they're not really. And this is played by character actor W. Earl Brown, who is wonderful. And he does a very good George Wallace. They're talking about the school busing issues that took place all over this country in the late 60s and through the 70s. And in Boston, I think like 2 years ago, they finally figured it all out, give or take. He was at that moment a very bad person.
So they ask Shirley questions about busing and about abortion, and she gives nuanced answers, which Brian Stokes Mitchell immediately tells her you can't say that, but it makes me so happy when someone sticks up for nuance. I love nuance.
The movie does a really nice job weaving in what the moment was like in this time period with the plot. So we see her go to Florida and someone says to her, and I just thought this was so funny because it reminds me of where we were culturally, like in 2016 or in the last year, where someone says like, I'm going to vote for you or George Wallace. And it's like the way people were like, I'm going to vote for RFK or Trump, or I'm going to vote for Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders. And it's like, what is the connective tissue between these candidates?
This voter saying, I'm going to vote for you or Wallace. This is why horseshoe theory is a hill that I will die on.
I think it's like the people who are like, I'm going to vote for the person who tells it like it is. What it is, maybe a trash fire, but they like that they're telling it like that. The conversation starts up that like she's going to draw votes away from the quote real candidates. And what is so extraordinarily poignant about this movie and agonizing is that we're still having these conversations and we don't really know what the answer is.
Someone shows up and tries to kill her.
Someone pulls a knife on her, and her husband is supposed to be watching out for her, and he had his head turned for like a second. I feel so bad for him because he missed this one thing that happened, and it can't all be on him. We see an interview with her and her husband, and you hear about like the sacrifices that they're both making. He's kind of torn on it.
They talk about the nature of the marriage, where she's described as 100 pounds of nuclear energy, and then she describes her husband as 200 pounds of patience.
They are a good match for each other. That isn't everything in a marriage, especially when one person is having to run the household while the other person is never there. And especially when, unfortunately, those roles are gendered because our society is garbage. But yeah, like you can see why there are problems. And her political team is trying so hard to polish her.
Yeah, they're Brian Stokes Mitchell is frustrated, and we see this magazine runs a picture where she and Wallace are posed like American Gothic, and I don't really understand what it's trying to say.
I don't either, because that is a picture of a father and a daughter, and not a couple. So there's that. I guess they're just saying like they're the same because they're both crazy or something. I guess maybe they're both fringe candidates. It's offensive.
So we meet one Walter Fauntleroy, who represents DC.
Yep, he is so sleazy, and he is so part of like the machine, the Willie Brown machine. And he does say to her like something about like there's all this stuff with delegates that used to be a thing that we don't need to worry about anymore, where like they went rounds to choose their candidate, and he's promising her that he'll give her his delegates if someone doesn't get through the first time, blah blah blah, and he wants her to drop out of the DC primary. Is all delegate stuff.
She won't go to the convention in Gary, and she later tells Barbara why she doesn't want to go, that it's all men. They're not going to pick me because I'm a woman. But again, Stanley is giving solid advice. Nobody knows how to run a campaign that doesn't play by the book, because like the book gets written for a reason.
And and she's getting encouraged by Barbara like to get like the radicals on board, get the Black Panthers. Which that was a strong taste to add to your stew back in 1972. One thing this movie makes clear is that men in politics continue to suck no matter which side they are on, because they all end up backing each other at the end of the day. They are not allies for women.
I mean, she's kind of desperate at the point where they get the Black Panthers on because she hasn't had a major endorsement.
At this point, she didn't make the network requirements for participating in a debate, so they're going to sue the networks for equal time. All of a sudden, this becomes a legal drama for a few minutes about equal time, which is fun.
So Robert Gottlieb goes to talk to a character who I noted as Mutton Chop Man, who explains the drawbacks and pluses of suing, that if he wins, it'll change everything, but if he loses, that's the end of it forever. And it's sort of funny how they pick him out to do this, because they're like, we can't afford lawyers. Then they turn to him and they're like, you're studying to become a lawyer, right?
Yep. You're like, good enough. She has a sit down with her sister, who I mentioned is played by Regina King, her real sister. Her sister is like, yeah, we support you, but you know what? You're making a mockery of yourself, which I thought was like an interesting perspective that I wouldn't have necessarily gone to on my own, but is the kind of thing that could be said by a sister to her sibling. She's basically making the point like, your idealism has taken you too far, and now you look foolish to some people. And one of those people is me.
She doesn't get along with her sister because their dad loved Shirley the most, she thinks, and then we go to what turns out to be a fake Chisholm fundraising party where people will throw these things and then they're just pretending that it's a party for Chisholm.
I'm sure this has never happened.
And they want money back from the campaign, and she says, like, they have a right to be mad. Stanley is frustrated. And, she might have gotten more votes in some places if she'd listened to him, but I don't think she'd have a campaign that we had a campaign that we remembered. So Stanley voices his frustration that this isn't a campaign. And then her first husband, Conrad, prevents her eventual second husband from beating up Stanley. He's about to quit, and she takes him into his side office, and we have the reverse of the "you can't fire me, I quit."
She has this lovely moment with Terrence Howard. This is where I started sobbing, actually, where she says to him, "I don't know how to not try. I believe in people." And I just started sobbing at this point because he says to her, maybe it takes someone crazy. I loved how true her passion was for what she was doing. I was furious and sad watching this moment because I was like, she got so far, she should have been able to get farther. And it's not fair.
It's not fair that things were ever a way where women weren't in Congress or Black people weren't in Congress. But also, it's 2 months before the convention, and a campaign that is polling in single digits is still running. This would not happen today.
She's walking around in downtown Brooklyn on the promenade, right near where Hillary Clinton's campaign headquarters was, where I used to make phone calls. And she is with Lucas, and all of a sudden, all these cops pull up and start telling him to get the hell away from her, because we find out that George Wallace has been shot 5 times and he survives somehow. Spite is a powerful motivator. And she wants to visit him. And everyone's like, what the hell are you thinking? Why would you ever do that? Do you know what that's going to look like?
She knows what it would mean for her to visit him, but she, once again, doesn't listen to advice.
She goes and visits him in the hospital because she's a much better person than I will ever be. And they pray together.
And she has an effect on him. He's talking to her like she's a person. And this is a believable conversion scene. Remember, my big bugbear is that the thing that I find least believable in movies is when someone makes a big speech that changes hearts and minds. In the Smithsonian Magazine article that I found, it talks about that, where Wallace's own daughter said that, yes, Shirley's visit did start him on a journey. And so at this point, I started thinking about how this scene could have been badly mishandled by a lesser director. And we were inspired to create a new occasional segment that we're calling Green Book Greenlight. Green Book Greenlight is a segment where we pitch clueless, insensitive, and tasteless ideas for terrible biopics that we are worried might get made in Hollywood. I have a couple projects I'm going to pitch you here. The first one would be a movie in which Shirley Chisholm's entire purpose is to help George Wallace become less racist, and it would be called Driving Mr. Wallace.
That's perfect. Give it all the Oscars.
After she visits him in the hospital, they carpool together for the remainder of the campaign, where she has to drive because he's dealing with becoming paralyzed.
She teaches him a bunch of lessons along the way and makes him a better person.
If her family or anything that indicates that she has a life beyond helping George Wallace to become less racist shows up, they're there for George Wallace too. It's all about him and helping him.
Perfect. I have one for you. I am going to call it The Queen of Kings. And it is about how Coretta Scott King goes to visit James Earl Ray in prison and gradually convinces him to be a better person by teaching him to read. Can he read? I don't know, but I'm saying he can't read. But she teaches him to read, and he finds a pathway out of racism because of that. But I think that it would be compelling to make him like a self-hating, impoverished person because, by the end, Dr. King was also trying to campaign against poverty in addition to civil rights. We find all that out, and Coretta forgives him because she finds all this out, and he gets better.
And we're led to believe that this actually happened, of course.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, because it should be on her to change him, even though he killed her husband. It's a woman's responsibility to forgive, no matter what.
So my next one, again, it's another buddy film. And in this case, it would be about Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, and Strom Thurmond, but it's a golf movie.
I like this. Is she his caddy?
Yes, she is his caddy.
Perfect.
So she gives him magical golf advice and life advice and helps him to become less racist. The last, again, it's a buddy film, but in this case, it's going to have another bedside visit between Confederate General Stonewall Jackson and Sojourner Truth, possibly Harriet Tubman, where the power of her friendship heals the septic wound in his arm and helps him become less racist.
Does he end up surviving in this?
Well, yes.
History?
Yes.
Does he win the war?
Yes.
Amazing.
I think we just went over the line.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we went over the line about 5 minutes ago.
As I was thinking of these, I was like, if Spike Lee were here, would he think these white women should shut up? Or would he nod and say, yeah, that's probably been pitched?
Spike Lee would be like, one of these movies is going to be my next masterpiece for Best Picture.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would appreciate it, but I think he would also probably acknowledge that one of these garbage movies could get made and would manage to somehow overshadow his next great, amazing masterpiece of a movie.
So back to our regularly scheduled programming. They're talking about California. Somehow, way back 50 plus years ago, the California primary actually mattered. And she's spending her own money, which is crazy.
The appellate court says that ABC has to give her time, so she gets a primetime special. And she's going to be on the next debate. So that's a huge win for her. And Barbara calls her up and is like, I've brokered a meeting with Huey Newton, but you have to meet on neutral ground, which turns out is Diane Carroll's house.
Yeah, she's fearless. But this is all just to give us a dash of hope before the end, because we relish these small victories. We realize even when they're talking, when the number of delegates it seems like she's going to get is in the hundreds, she's never going to win this thing at this point. It's about having leverage for cabinet positions.
One note here about how Willie Brown shows up. He's a complicated figure in our history. Oh, boy. Willie Brown. Huge fan of Jim Jones, Willie Brown.
It is time for a new segment called Sarah Managed to Wedge Jonestown in Somehow. Sarah, tell me about Willie Brown's love affair with Jim Jones.
Okay, so quickly, Jim Jones was hugely popular in progressive and democratic circles in California because he did a lot of progressive things while he was abusing people and using Black people, particularly Black women and elderly Black people, as human shields against his terrible behavior. So he did have a lot of fans in progressive political circles in Northern California. He talked about the role that he had in getting Moscone elected and getting Harvey Milk elected. Willie Brown was obviously a very important figure in California politics at the time, wheeler dealer. Willie Brown was such a fan of Jim Jones that even after he killed 900 people in the jungle, Willie Brown wouldn't divest himself from his investment in Jim Jones.
How? So would Willie Brown still say, no, I think this guy who killed 900 people in the jungle was a good guy?
He called him a close personal friend and a highly trusted brother in the struggle for liberation. And then after everyone died, he kind of said, he still did a lot of good things.
That's the thing where you choose to have integrity when your old associate becomes unpopular on Jim Jones.
He once called Jim Jones a combination of Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, and Chairman Mao.
No.
Like, three of those people are okay.
Thank you. That was our segment. Sarah managed to wedge Jonestown in somehow.
Willie Brown is being a bro, and he is saying, nope, we're going for McGovern. He's electable. And they're speculating on what Willie Brown was promised. And they said, and someone's like, Secretary of Housing. That's all they ever give Black folks.
Conrad says, because it's true. That was like Ben Carson's position in the first...
In Trump, The Force Awakens.
He was a brain surgeon. Like, what?
So she speaks to the Black delegates and tells them to hold on to their votes. And they're basically just, to your point.
They want leverage. Like, they want a more representative cabinet. And Ron Dellums sells her out to McGovern.
Yeah, bros are gonna be bros.
But the upside is that her sister Muriel is finally proud of her and not resentful anymore.
There's something comforting about seeing, like, since time immemorial, men have found ways to band together to fuck over a woman. So praise be the patriarchy.
That's why she didn't want to go to the thing in Gary, and CBS calls her. It's all over because Walter Fauntleroy is releasing to McGovern, and of course, he has some slimy excuse to weasel his way out. Something about, I said you could have my delegates if McGovern didn't get it on the first round, but McGovern not getting it on the first round is how she gets delegates.
He's garbage.
And then she sees Ron selling her out on TV, which is the point where she says to release her delegates. She is bowing out with grace.
And someone on television says, I think it's Willie Brown, says, ignore the dreamers and the fools and get behind the candidate who can win in November. Yep.
All sorts of things we say. It was a poisoned chalice. People don't defeat the incumbent. Yada. Yada, yada, and yada. Although there is basis for those explanations.
And she does something pretty fucking remarkable here, too, which is she tells Ron to come and see her and forgives him. And they continue to work together for the rest of their lives.
Well, that's politics. If everyone in Congress or the state legislatures refused subsequently to work with anyone who'd backstabbed them, you'd have no co-signers on any bills.
It's true. It's wild. These people are wild.
Yeah, and I loved that she let herself cry in front of her staff. Get behind the candidate who can win. And it seems to me that over the past decades, the Democratic Party's efforts to avoid creating more McGoverns keeps creating more McGoverns. They haven't really found a solution. But who gets the last word here but the real-life Barbara Lee, who took over the seat held by Ron Dellums.
Holy crap. This was so gorgeous, this montage. We find out all of the things that Shirley accomplished in her lifetime and also see, like, the people who came about because of her. And we find out that at one point, Shirley works with George Wallace to pass a bill for domestic workers to get minimum wage. Like, she literally changed him.
She worked across the aisle. She worked with Bob Dole while she was on agricultural committee, and bipartisanship, I miss you. So did you have any choice dialogue since we don't have awards talk this week?
No, I think I threw my choice dialogue in here. I thought this was a great screenplay.
4 lines that stood out to me that I jotted down were, and I think this was something Shirley Chisholm really did say, to this man who complained about her earning an equal wage to him. When you see me coming into this chamber, vanish. Also, that's my answer on one side of the Mason-Dixon or the other, and I am not leaving out the nuance. Then something that Gottlieb says to her and her team, I'm studying to be a lawyer. Why? And finally, they're all from Florida. They don't know what good weather is. So,
love it.
With that, shall we move on to scoring this thing? Sarah, can you please give our listeners a quick refresher about how we score movies?
I'd be happy to. We rate our movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to the issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So for outward appearances, hair and makeup, and getting people to look like who they were supposed to be, I gave it a 9.
I gave it a 10. Acting and casting, I gave it a 10.
I gave it an 8 because I had issues around the accent and like a few other little things. A passage of time, I gave it an 8.
I also gave it an 8.
Costuming, I gave it an 8.5.
I gave it a 9. Quality of the script, I gave an 8.
I did too. For accuracy, I gave it a 7, the highest that a film has earned for accuracy since Lincoln.
I gave it a 5 just because I did pull some things. This is where I dinged the accent and some other like little things here and there. Anyway, storytelling. Oh, sorry.
For storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it an 8.
I gave it a 7.
For production value, I gave it an 8.5.
I gave it a 9 for that living room alone.
That was a brilliantly realized living room. For production, direction, decision making, I gave it a 9.
I gave it an 8.
And for Do We Care, I gave it a 9.
I gave it a 10. So I came to an 8.4.
Came to an 8.3, which brings our tally to 8.35. So, Shirley, you earned a second opinion.
Second opinion is an element we stole blatantly from How Did This Get Made?
Prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of IMDb reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of the film.
They didn't have a ton of reviews for this on IMDb.
I noticed there was one 1-star and 1 4-star, and normally we don't consider anything with more than 2 stars if we're doing second opinion. But the 4 review that you found really sounded more like a 2 to me. Like this person was too nice if they disliked the movie that much. Why don't you read me the first one, Sarah? This first review is called Missed Opportunity, 1 star out of 10, and it was written by Justin J. Cantor, all one word, on March 24th of 2024.
Yes. While some viewers may find resonance in the portrayal presented in this Wikipedia film entry, those acquainted with Shirley Chisholm's enduring legacy are likely to encounter profound disappointment. Regrettably, this entry is saturated with inaccuracies and fabrications regarding her life, overlooking ample opportunities to craft a genuine and compelling narrative through thorough research. Rather than delving into the profound motivations propelling her historic presidential bid, the entry trivializes her aspirations, thereby diminishing the gravity of her candidacy. This reads like it was written by ChatGPT.
I don't want to hear any more of it. It's really boring. We are only reading it because it was the only 1-star review. This film has not gotten a lot of attention there, but this is just the most boring review.
This is a person who I always got trapped talking to at parties in my early 20s.
Oh, God. Okay, let's try. This next one is called Cartoonish by Michael R. 07217, written on August 6th of 2024, and he gave it 4 stars out of 10, but it seems from the review like he was being nice. So I'll start this and I might have you finish. I fully intended to find Shirley to be inspirational and important. However, less than 20 minutes into the film, I could do nothing but abandon the experience. I know Regina King is an excellent actor, but how could she possibly work with such horrendously amateurish writing? Every character was a cartoon, and every line was utterly painful to hear. Every scene felt like a contrived skit meant to teach us an important life lesson, and the combined effect was a real shame to waste such an historic figure and moment in time on such a terrible script. Didn't the producers see this train wreck coming? They first said they only watched the first 20 minutes, but then they sound like they're talking about the whole film. Sarah, what do you think of this review?
I mean, just in the last year working on this show, I've seen more amateurish movies than Shirley. Trainwreck, that's aggressive. This is a whole finished movie. If it's not your cup of tea, that's one thing. However, yeah.
Agreed. So other stuff that you should watch instead or as a supplement, unless you have anything else to say about this review.
Here's something interesting. So I just clicked on Justin's profile on IMDb, and he is talking about another thing. But he says, take, for instance, their recent Shirley Chisholm movie debacle. It looks as though they threw spare change at it and managed to get everything about Chisholm wrong. He really doesn't like that movie.
And I also wanted to say one of the things I appreciated about this film was that it does that thing we like of honing in on the portion of someone's life that you're actually interested in. That was the reverse of a Wikipedia film entry. Wikipedia is the one where you have to spend the first half hour on their boring childhood.
Yeah, we got the full picture of her childhood in one scene with her sister.
Sarah, do you think that there's other stuff that people should watch as a supplement to Shirley, since we both think you should watch it?
Yeah. Totally watch the movie. For any children's birthdays coming up, Shirley Chisholm is a Verb is a great children's book and a great gift idea. So strong recommend for that. Anything Regina King does is going to be interesting. I would also say, if you haven't watched any of American Crime, John Ridley's a heck of a writer, and I think that American Crime is a great show to get started kind of on his work and see the way that he creates really nuanced characters.
So things that I would recommend in addition to Shirley for an angle into George Wallace and Alabama, listen to the album Southern Rock Opera by the Drive-By Truckers. There's a kind of spoken word segment in it that I want to quote here. Wallace spent the rest of his life trying to explain away his racist past, and in 1982, he won his last term in office with over 90% of the black vote. Such is the duality of the Southern thing. And George Wallace died back in 98, and he's in hell now, not because he's a racist. His track record as a judge and his late life quest for redemption make a good argument for his being at worst no worse than most white men of his generation, North or South. Because of his blind ambition and his hunger for votes, he turned a blind eye to the suffering of Black America, and he became a pawn in the fight against civil rights causes. Fortunately for him, the devil is also a Southerner. And I loved this album as an examination into what they call the duality of the Southern thing. Sarah, can you please take us out?
I'd be happy to. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. and tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids for our episodes. Our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about Listomania with my dear friend Alana Levin from the Graphic Policy Podcast. It is also my birthday episode, and we're doing Listomania because it stars Roger Daltrey of The Who. Roger Daltrey and I have the same birthday, and he is playing the 19th century composer and performer Franz Liszt.
And it's directed by Ken Russell, who is a stone cold weirdo.
Yes. So we are going to have so much fun talking about Listomania, and I'm looking forward to all of you. And I hope you tune in again then. And good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sarah.